Welcome to this sunny spring day here in Wesel, Germany. We want to try out those here, the Vivo X200 Ultra versus the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max. You can see the camera specs on board. We have a quadruple lens setup on the Huawei and we have a triple lens setup on the Vivo. Main highlight is the main camera sensor, 35mm 101.28 inch size sensor on the Vivo, and on the Huawei we have a variable aperture, also 101.28 inch sized sensor. The ultra wide, however, on the Vivo is the same size, where the Huawei has a bit of a smaller sized sensor there for sure. And then we have the large 200 megapixel periscope zoom that has to fight against the two telesensors on the Huawei. And then of course we have some front-facing shooters. Huawei is housed in a 3D face detection module, and I think we start off with the front-facing video. Front-facing cameras 4K 30 and 4K 60 frames per second. They also offer autofocus, so the Huawei has autofocus. You see it's nicely, should be nicely focusing here on the, there we go. And the other way around also has autofocus. Yes, it's focusing. And we have the opportunity on the Huawei to go to the ultra wide angle. It's like 21 instead of 24, so it's not really a big difference there. How's HDR? Which one is performing better? Very close also in terms of colors, I think. Maybe the Huawei a tiny bit better there. We have two actually on the Huawei. Which one is better in terms of stabilization? I'm walking down a small little hill. I can show it to you a bit wider here. And now I'm on top of the hill. Which one is performing better? What do you think? Well, I can switch to the main cameras on the back on the Vivo, which is cool. So, boop. Let me show you this. This is an ultra wide angle. Sadly, I cannot do it on the Huawei, so I have to stop recording. I switched and I am now with the ultra wide angle on the Huawei. You see how much difference there is in field of view. The Huawei is much wider. My daughter already in the shot, on the Vivo not yet. Now it's getting in shot. So yeah, this is what you can do in terms of ultra wide angles on both. Then we can go to 1x here, which is 24. We can go to 1x here, which is 35mm, a bit more cropped down on the Vivo. Which one is performing better also in this situation with the lights there? Same sensor size on both. Then we can go to 96mm and 85mm here. Which one is closer? Which one is better? A bit overexposed, I think, on the Huawei. Then we can go to 10x here, and we can go to 10x here, actually 230mm on both now. And again, a bit more overexposed. The colors look a bit more right on the Vivo, at least on screen. Let's go back to the ultra wide angle. Which one has smoother transitions here? Which one would you prefer? So now we have ultra wide angle, the widest field of view on both of them. You see that the Huawei is much wider here than the Vivo is. Even though I have set the Vivo to less stabilized, which gives me a little bit of a wider shot as well. However, still I think the Huawei is much wider, and for a vlogging scenario where you want to show lots of your surroundings, the Huawei, especially in bright daylight, might have an edge here over the Vivo. But when the sun comes in, maybe you have a bit more lens flare effects on Huawei than on Vivo. Let's go and switch to the 1x or 35mm here on the Vivo, and we want to do it on the Huawei as well. And then you see how much more cropped in the Vivo is. Even though I'm holding it as far as I can, it's so much more cropped in at 35. Gives you a bit more bokeh for sure, but it's a bit too cropped in. Even though I have the widest setting set here to the Vivo and I'm holding it as stretched out as I can with my arm, it's not as good as the Huawei here in this scenario. For vlogging, I think 24mm on the Huawei makes more sense, and the wider field of view of the ultra wide angle is a bit of an extra that I really like. At low light, probably not so much, but then you can rely on the very good 24mm on the Huawei. So what do you think? So one short sentence to the front-facing camera. I think they're pretty much identical. The only thing that you notice is that we have more flexibility with the Huawei with the zoom in and out animations and the possibility to do so. I think in terms of like overexposure and HDR, they are pretty similar. But in terms of stabilization, the Huawei has a short kind of edge there over the Vivo. When we talk about the ultra-wide angle video, you see a much wider field of view on the Huawei, more contrasty look all over the frame on the Vivo through all the lenses. The Vivo is a bit over sharpened, especially on the ultra-wide angle. Look at the trees there and this white outline there. It's not looking so nice. The Huawei is a lot softer all over the frame, has a wider field of view, maybe not as detailed, but I prefer the Huawei in this case. When we go and check out the main camera sensor now, you will see that the Huawei again is a little bit softer and doesn't have so much contrast as the Vivo does. The Vivo is a bit more contrasty and a little bit sharper than what the Huawei is doing, which is softer but has some lens flare issues sometimes. But in this case, I also still prefer a little bit of the softer look than over the over-sharpened kind of look that we have there. When we check out the 85 versus 96 millimeter, you can see that again a bit brighter, a bit more contrasty kind of look. And when we look at the detail levels, they're almost identical. There's not much of a difference between those two there. However, when we go to the 10X, both struggle a little bit with the focusing. So you see it's slightly out of focus here. And this one here also slightly out of focus. But I would still give it in terms of stabilization to the Vivo. For vlogging with the ultra-wide angle, both are good, but yeah, of course you get a wider field of view still on the Huawei. And again, you see already here, without me zooming in, but if I zoom in, very nice expression by the way, how much over-sharpened this is here in the background. It's like not looking very pleasant. And the Huawei has a bit of overexposure maybe, but it's softer there and doesn't look too digital, which we have on the Vivo. However, what I'm quite impressed by is both handle this HDR kind of situation, even though the Huawei has a much smaller sensor there. Very nice, very good, no issues there at all. Colors are a bit tad warmer there on the Vivo, a bit cooler on the Huawei, but both are doing a fine job there. And when we now go to the main camera sensors, I was quite surprised how good the Vivo is still there for vlogging. It's a bit more cropped in because it's 35 millimeter, but if you select the less stable version, then you can get away if you really stretch out your arm, at least with me, and you get a sharp, nice picture, nice background blur for sure. So maybe again a bit over sharpened there, the picture. This is like a little bit of an issue there. And the Huawei, as soft as the other cameras are, is just simply soft, nice softness. It's not like too soft, too smudgy. Has this nice softness, which I like in this case, and I would prefer. So yeah, which one would you prefer for vlogging there? Yes, I know the more background blur is a bit attractive on the Vivo for sure. But again, like I said, this is a bit softer, doesn't do over sharpening so much, where the Vivo is like doing over sharpening and it's sometimes looking a bit too crisp and too digital. Nevertheless, I was quite surprised that this 35 millimeter vlogging capabilities are there on the Vivo. So we take a look at the macro shots first, and what we can see is that the Mate 80 Pro Max can focus much closer than the Vivo X200 Ultra with its tele macro capabilities. And this is the shot that you get at 85, which is the default macro lens on the X200 Ultra, and this is the shot that you can get with the 96, which is the 4x telemacro shot on the Mate 80 Pro Max. You see how much details there are, and you see that the colors are a bit off on the Vivo and the details are really not there, but you can crop in digitally and then you can get a shot that is like, first of all, the colors are a bit more accurate but still not on the same level as the very accurate colors on the Mate 80 Pro Max. And the detail levels, however, are now on par, even though I would still think that if you really pixel peep, that the Mate 80 Pro Max has a bit of an edge there when it comes to tele-macro capabilities. Ultra-wide angle on first glance, very, very similar. We have a bit more punchy colors on the Mate, and the Mate has a bit of overexposure there. We have a bit of better HDR, also a little bit better sensor. The Mate is shooting by default at 25 megapixels, where we have only 12 megapixels on the Vivo. But the Vivo has a larger sensor and you can clearly see it that it captures more information, more details. Look at the license plates here. It's just a huge difference, and this is one of the good things of the Vivo, that it has such a great ultra wide angle that is able to capture more details there, even though it is not as wide as the Huawei for sure. Then a picture of my daughter, 35mm I tried here, just to see what happens here. For some reason the Vivo is now over punchy there with the greens. It's totally fake, and the Huawei has an edge here in terms of colors. But when you take a look at detail levels, a bit of smudgy and blurry in comparison to the very sharp photo that we have here on the Vivo. Why is that the case? Again, 25 megapixels there. When I zoom out a little bit, you will see that it's still a little bit less sharp on the Huawei. But you also see that the detail separation between the foreground and the background and the detail level on the skin here, for example, on the Vivo is just simply superior to that what the Huawei can do. The other way around, cropping in from the ultra wide angle on the Vivo to 28mm versus the 1x sensor 24mm on the Mate 80 Pro Max. In terms of colors, now it's flipped. The Huawei has some more punchy colors and we have more realistic colors on the Vivo. When we go in here, we can see that the detail levels, however, are superior on the Huawei for sure. So yes, cropping in on the Vivo ultra wide angle to get the 24 to 28mm is not helping or cannot compete. However, it is much closer than what we saw earlier with the 35 cropped in from the main of the Huawei. That is a little bit worse than the cropped in from the ultra wide angle here of the Vivo is doing. Very contrasty colors here, where here it is keeping it a little bit less contrasty, but also I think slightly overexposed there. Let's take a look at the 2x shot on both. So it's a crop from the main camera sensor on both. We have much more blurrier background on the X200 Ultra. It has the 35mm sensor, so it only has to crop in 1.5 times here to get this shot, but also all over the place it's a bit of a soft shot in general, and it's getting blurry already here, where the Huawei keeps everything sharp, maybe a little bit tad too sharp, maybe over sharpened as well, but when you want this look, then this is what you get. I could argue that the Huawei might have an edge here, even though the blurriness of the background is better on the Vivo. Then here 85 versus 96, so their primary tele sensor there. What we can see here is again the blurriness, thanks to the larger sensor, a little bit blurrier on the Vivo in comparison to the Huawei. That seems to be a little bit sharper there. And when we compare them side by side, you will see that in terms of detail levels, however, not much of a difference between those two. Huawei again captures 25 megapixel shots there, where it's 12 megapixels on the Vivo. The detail levels, however, are very, very similar on both there. At daylight, there's not much of a difference. And then again, this time around, I was cropping into the Vivo shot to 96mm. We have this large 200 megapixel sensor, so you should be able to do that just to see what we can get. Again, a bit more punchy colors on the Huawei, which is not so accurate. And I think, yeah, it was not focusing even. So Vivo had some focusing issues, was not focusing even here, even though I used tap to focus, maybe it misfocused. The Huawei nicely focused here, and the chains you see are in focus, where here it's like out of focus, it was like slightly focusing there to the back. And the rest in terms of detail level is like then hard to judge, but I would say they're very, very similar here, indeed. And then this time around, focusing worked on the Vivo, 10 times zoom on both. It's a bit more cropped in on the Huawei, and the Huawei in this term is like going back to 12 megapixels because it's 10 times zooms. It's not keeping up the 25 megapixels that it had before. And here you can see an advantage definitely on Vivo's side. Less process, less movement out there. The second sensor on the Huawei is a bit weak in comparison to what the Vivo has, even at daylight. The detail levels are not so far off, but I would say the smoothness, the smudging on the Huawei is a bit bigger there. Look at the detail levels here, and here you can see it's smoothing things out a little bit, where here it keeps it a little bit more dirty and a little bit more details in there. This is, but they're very similar at 10x here. some airplane was flying by at 10x. I captured both of them, and you see, besides like the bluer sky on the Huawei, they captured almost identical details there. Not much of a difference between those two. Here 10 times, I think close focusing distance is a bit better there than on the Huawei. The secondary sensor on the Huawei has some issues with close focusing distance, but here the details here are much more towards Vivo's side there. And here as well, I think both are going to their limits, but again, a bit more contrasty look, a little bit more details that I see here on the Vivo shot in comparison to the Huawei bokeh. However, very, very similar between those two. And then a bird, and there also detail levels, I think it's a bit soft even on the Vivo, where the Huawei is over sharpening maybe, but the Huawei looks a little bit more crisper for sure. When the bird is moving, however, both struggle in getting it really sharp, as you see here. Let's take a look at the portrait shots. When we take a look at portrait shots, we have the first portrait shot using the telesensors, which is 96 and 85 millimeters, both very similar there. In terms of colors, I think maybe a tad bit warmer, that bit red on the X200 Ultra, a bit more yellowish, whitish on the Mate. In terms of detail levels, very, very similar. Both recreate the eyebrows. I would even say I think the eyebrows are a bit more accurate recreated by the Mate instead of what the Vivo is doing here. The eyes, however, are a lot more faker here on the Huawei, where the eyes on the Vivo are a little bit better. I have a smoothed out skin there on the Huawei, where it is not so smoothed out here on the Vivo. So this one is a draw. Then when we go into 135 on the Vivo and the secondary 6.2 times telezoom sensor on the Mate 80 Pro Max, it becomes a bit more evident that the secondary sensor on the Huawei is not really that good. First of all, the colors much accurate on the X200 Ultra. When we take a look at the detail levels, you can also see it's very, very smooth there on the Huawei, and they try to redraw eyebrows and recreate the eyes, but it is in favor of the Vivo that is easily beating the Huawei here. And even if the Huawei can go here at 10x, which appears to be a bit sharper even than the last shot, I would still give it to the Vivo when it comes to the portrait, slightly better with the secondary or longer portrait, and otherwise they're very, very similar. Also with the 2x, which is a crop on both from the main sensor there. One could argue that it is a bit more over sharpened, a bit more processed looking on the Vivo. It's a bit softer looking there on the Huawei. Which one would you prefer? First glance, it looked a bit more clearer on the Vivo. Yeah, but you be the judge. I would give it a draw for them there in terms of portraits. But longer portraits is definitely win for the X200 Ultra. The secondary sensor on the Mate is not really helping there much. Time video here on the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max. What do you think about this one here? Has a 101.28 inch size sensor, but AOV technology. It should help with the brightness of this picture. What do you think about this yellow light here shining on my face? Probably a bit too yellow. Walking away from the light now into the dark. How well is it doing here? What do you think about this one? And now turning around, and you see how it will look like here. So this one or the Vivo X200 Ultra. Night video now here on the Vivo X200 Ultra using the ultra wide angle here. What do you think about this one here? How good is stabilization here? 101.28 inch size sensor, just a wider field of view. Walking now towards the light, under the light, yellow light, as I said before. Internal mics here, voice optimization is turned on. What do you think about this one here? How good is this doing and performing in comparison to the Huawei? And what do you think about the video quality here on the Vivo X200 Ultra? At night time, we see that the ultra-wide angles have different color schemes. We have way more colorful photos on the Huawei, where it's a bit of drained out of colors on the Vivo. I personally like the Huawei a little bit better, though I think I'm leaning towards the Vivo in this case, how the shot probably looked like, because it's just a bit too colorful on the Mate. But when we take out the details, we have the similar thing that we saw at daylight. More details on the larger sensor that we have on the ultra-wide angle of the Vivo. Colors and HDR, however, seems to be a little bit better. It's like slightly overexposed here, where here it seems to be more imbalanced, which is quite interesting, even though we have a smaller sensor. But detail levels, look at the brickwork, compare it with here. Look at the trees there. It's just simply a huge difference, and there is where the Vivo just simply beats the Huawei hands down, even though sometimes it feels a bit overexposed, but the detail level around the window, for example, is just simply on another level there on the Vivo. So Vivo's very good there. With the main camera sensors, I'm a bit shocked to see this. You see from here, which still had a bit of color on the ultra wide angle, to here, same street, same lights. It's drawn out of color. It's all too blue here on the Vivo. The Huawei is way too colorful there, but it's a bit more warmer, which is true to life to those warmish kind of colors of this light, because it is a bit of yellow and not this white as the Vivo makes it out to be. So the Vivo is like drawing the colors out of this whole picture, and the same goes for this one here. It's more this warmish yellow than this like not so warmish yellow that we see there. In terms of detail levels, maybe let's go to 35 versus 35. So I'm cropping in on the Huawei, and it's very similar between those two. I would even say it's so much as we have a 24mm, and it's maybe slightly better at 35, not so processed looking on the Vivo, but still in terms of detail level, it's almost on par, and it's even brighter, can brighten up the shadow, has more details there, has better HDR. Look at the light here and here. Yes, the coating, lens coating is slightly better there on the Vivo, but only slightly. It's not a huge difference between those two. I would give this main camera sensor to the Huawei actually, also at night, because it has the more accurate colors. Detail level is on par. There's not much of a difference between those two here. And this is just simply fantastic when you take into account that this is 35mm optical. This is cropped in from 24mm with a slightly same sensor size there. Let's go and check out the telezooms. I was also surprised to see that. First of all, lens coating is a bit worse here. You see it here, where here's a bit better with the light. But let's check out the details here, and especially color accuracy again, which is way better on the Huawei again. Look at the Aldi logo there. You know Aldi, this is wrong colors there. It's overexposed. The Bush logo there as well. Here you can read it. There you cannot read it. It's a difference, and it's noisy on the Vivo, where the Huawei has denoising. It's a bit softer. It's smoother for sure. But I'm surprised that the Huawei can keep up there at night with this kind of shot. When you zoom in even further, 10 times, it's also still keeping up here, especially with the colors, but also with the detail level. Edeka and this Lurving readable better. Also this one here, it's a bit softer. The Aldi logo again, all the colors nicely distinguished, where here they're melting into each other. It is a bit surprising. Here you can see that it's falling apart a bit. Here you can read it very nicely, so the larger sensor should work better, but the processing of Huawei is pretty good that it can keep up. Especially with colors there. I'm surprised. Oh, I'm zooming in even further, and there we finally get to get the advantage of the larger sensor here on the Vivo. So this is now 30 times zoom, I think, and there you can see more details. Still, I think this is like the wrong colors there, and it's like this is a bit more accurate, even though it's melting too much into each other from the colors. So quite surprised here how close they actually are, those zoom solutions, especially when it comes to lower light situations. Let's take a look at selfies, and this is a clear win here for the Huawei. First of all, it's a bit too mustard, too warm color on the Vivo, but then it's also very blurry because it has some issues with the very slow shutter speed. We have the same issues on the Huawei, very slow shutter speed, but it's way more detailed there. And the bokeh, very blurry, a little bit less blurry there. Yeah, but in this case, it's a win for the Huawei when it comes to selfies. So quite surprised that they are getting closer together, especially when it comes to nighttime photography. Ranking and conclusion, TLDR, the Vivo X200 Ultra gets a score of 9.6, where the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max gets a score of 9.4. So we have a clear winner here, which is the Vivo X200 Ultra, as you can see here on my scoring board, Where are the big differences? You can see that when you take a look at the index score, it's 4.797 versus 4.721, so it's very close together. Main camera is, from the scoring system, identical, but the Huawei has a bit of an edge here with an index score of 4.915, where it's just 4.9 on the Vivo X200 Ultra. I just saw it at nighttime, where it's just simply better in terms of colors and has almost the same details, same as with daylights when you take the shots, but it's 24mm instead of 35mm, and I think it has better HDR. This is like a slight edge towards the newer sensor that we see on the Mate 80 Pro Max. RYYB also helps at nighttime, especially also with low light support there. Ultra wide angle, however, it's completely different there. The ultra wide angle is a bit weak on the Mate 80 Pro Max. Yes, at nighttime it's not so obvious because it's like hard for both, but it's a clear win, especially at daylight, that you see so much more details. That's very large sensor, basically the same sensor size as the main camera, should get also the same score. This is why we have this here. Ultra wide angle 14mm versus the 30mm that you have here on the Huawei. This is one of the benefits of the Huawei, that we have a very large field of view with 30mm, but it's not a huge difference between 13 and 14mm, but still the quality is much better on the X200 Ultra, and this is something that I had to take into account here. Zoom performance, however, is very close between those, and I was not expecting that because we have this larger, way larger sensor on the X200 Ultra of 1.4 inch size. We have this two dual periscope zoom cameras there on the Mate 80 Pro Max, but they cannot really in sensor size compete with the X200 Ultra, but they come very close, especially at nighttime. Was very impressed by the color accuracy and details that it can still pull off with those zoom cameras there. Score of 9.7 versus 9.8 here. And then we have video recording, which is a win for the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max. First of all, the front-facing video on the X200 Ultra is way too shaky still, which is a bit of a downside. The rest is almost identical between those. I like the more flexibility that you have on the Mate 80 Pro Max. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. It has nice smooth animations there, which is quite nice. And I like that as well. When it comes to the front-facing, when it comes to the main camera video, we see also a slight edge there on the Mate 80 Pro Max, especially when it comes to the ultra-wide angle, which should be the X200 Ultra's goal. But if you just take a normal video with video mode, it's way over-sharpened on the X200 Ultra, so much so that it always feels digitalized, always feels like a smartphone video. Yes, on the X200 Ultra, you can also go to the very good log mode, and then you have a very softer image that can definitely compete with the Mate 80 Pro Max, even surpass it. But I like the more consistent Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max that looks a little bit softer, but still providing you with enough details that you are satisfied with the shot. And with the wider field of view, 12mm for video here, it even has a bit of an edge in terms of ultra wide angle. Yeah, not for video so much, but for low light video not so much, but for normal video in daylight it has a bit of an edge. And then the main camera sensor, of course, in video on the X200 Ultra, 35mm. Yeah, you saw that in this video. You can maybe use it for vlogging if you use the wider field of view, which weakens the stability a little bit, but I would still prefer the Mate 80 Pro Max's wider field of view there. That is a little bit better, especially if you really pixel peep at the X200 Ultra. This is, with the main sensor, the same issue with this super over sharpened look. Yes, lock mode will rescue it, but still we are checking out the default video recording, which most of the people will use, and not log recording, and therefore the Mate 80 Pro Max out of the box has the better video experience. Portraits, quite interesting, but in the end I have to give it to the Vivo X200 Ultra, a score of 9.6 here versus 9.4. I think the Mate 80 Pro Max is falling apart, especially when you go to the longer zooms. It has those longer zooms, but it's falling apart there, where it's clearly too digitalized looking. However, the colors are pretty nice most of the time. Selfie camera is a win for the Huawei, especially at low light. It can beat the X200 Ultra that is most of the time blurry. And I took several selfies at the night, and I only showed you one, but it's just a representation of what I got with the other shots. It's just simply too blurry and not very detailed there. Camera UI is a huge win for the X200 Ultra, has a very nice one-hand optimized camera user interface, which I really like. With a few swipe gestures you can control almost everything. You probably don't need a second hand most of the time. And extra features, had tons of extra features. I'm just talking a few of them, like the log video recording. Yes, the Mate 80 Pro Max has it as well, but it's a bit of a fake-ish log video recording that is just taking the colors out, and if you later color, it's harder to color grade. It's not a true log recording how you really would like to have it. And on the X200 Ultra you have 24, 25 and 50 frames per second that you can choose in Pro Video mode. On the Huawei you don't have this option, which is a bit of a cumbersome thing. And many other options, like on the Vivo you can turn off noise reduction in video in Pro mode, and you have the ability to burn in LUTs automatically in portrait video mode, which is a nice feature. Things that are still missing on the Mate 80 Pro Max. Yes, portrait video is another thing. With fake bokeh you have this ability on the Huawei, but only limited to 1080p. And the Vivo can do it at 4K 30 frames per second as well. So in the end, where does it end up in my ranking system? As you see here, the Vivo X200 Ultra is still ranked number 1. Yes, we are waiting the X300 Ultra and we are waiting the Oppo Find X9 Ultra to maybe climb up the rank there and beat the X200 Ultra, but we have to see. And the Mate 80 Pro Max is still ranked number 5. So yes, it is ranked under the X8 Ultra from Oppo and the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, as well as its own cousin, the Pura 80 Ultra here. So a 9.6 ranking out of 10 for the Vivo X200 Ultra, currently number 1, still number 1, and a 9.4 ranking here for the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max. What is your opinion? What do you think? Which one was better in certain situations? Which one you would prefer? Taking for vlogging, taking for photos? Write it down in the comment section. That's everything for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until the next time. Bye.